Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. Just one subject for today, a subject that I'm sure all of you know about, but how much you know about this particular subject may very well depend on where you get your news. If you're getting all your news from the so-called mainstream media, the major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, or if you're getting all your news from the liberal cable stations such as MSNBC, CNN, you may not know much about this either. That's why I'm here, to fill everybody in. But I'm sure everybody knows that there have been enormous protests going on all over Cuba. This was on Sunday, the day before I'm recording this. Monday, you're seeing it on Tuesday. I understand that the streets of Cuba are quiet now, because the military and the police, the authorities, have stepped in to put down these demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, by the way. Mostly, I heard that there was one government store. The Cuban government operates special stores to, they're trying to attract tourists. They're not really getting any tourism these days because of coronavirus, but they have these special stores that accept American dollars, that accept non-Cuban currency. That is one way that the Cuban government, this communist government, is staying afloat, by bringing in this foreign currency. But the items in these stores are too expensive for the average Cuban to afford. Though I have to marvel a little bit at the number of cell phones Cubans seem to have, as you'll see in a moment. I'm going to be showing you some Twitter videos of these protests, and you'll see perhaps in these videos, but I've definitely seen it in other videos, you just notice a lot of cell phones. Well, that's how these little videos that you're seeing, that's how they're being created, on cell phones. These are Twitter videos or cell phone videos that are being put on Twitter. So I'm going to go very quickly to the videos, and I'm going to have an interesting comment about the videos. But first, I just have to make an interesting point that I don't think you're going to get anywhere else. But there's an important lesson from this. Well, one important lesson is what the Cuban people think of communism, because we have our friends on the left claiming to be, well, practically outright democratic, quote-unquote democratic socialists, but the people actually living under socialism don't seem to be too happy about that, just like black people living in these black neighborhoods such as Harlem, where I lived for 10 years. I've mentioned this a number of times, so I know the area, I know the people very well. They are not the ones who are calling to defund the police. We know that because of the recent mayoral election, or the primary. It was the primary, but New York City is so democratic that if a Democrat wins the primary, that's virtually the same as electing the mayor. Again, I know because I lived in New York for 40 years, but it's not the people who actually live in these high crime neighborhoods who are calling to defund the police, such as Harlem, where again I lived for 10 years. I know the people, but I'm getting a little off track. The point I want to make is about Iran, actually, because our friends on the left are saying that these sanctions on Iran, they should be lifted because they don't do anything. They're not going to bring down the Iranian government. And the argument that they always use is, look at Cuba. We've been blockading Cuba for decade after decade, and the Cuban government is still there. But that argument may not last much longer. Time will tell. We are going to have to see. And I would also just throw in that contra the New York Times and these other liberal outlets, the ones who are reporting this news, the New York Times, they're the most prominent offender. They are characterizing these demonstrations as anti-government demonstrations, and they are citing as a reason for these demonstrations the lack of tourism that I mentioned, and coronavirus and other things. but they are not mentioning, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, they are not mentioning the true cause. It's a demonstration not against the government, it's a demonstration against communism, socialism. That's the government. If it were not a socialist government, if it were not a communist government, if it were a free market democracy, the people would not be demonstrating, because they would not be in the condition that they are if Cuba were not a communist country. So, well, perfect example. I guess we can cite an example, another country, since our liberal friends want to cite Cuba. We can cite Venezuela. Venezuela was a vibrant country until Hugo Chavez got elected. Now Maduro, he's been in there for years and years, and he apparently is even worse, though I think he is starting to, or has started to, allow some private enterprises to blossom in Venezuela, similarly to what happened in Cuba, actually. There are some private businesses in Cuba, but they are required by law, or they are forced by the communist government to be very small, and they are limited in how much money they're allowed to make, how profitable they are allowed to be. So I guess that was a sop to the Cuban people. Apparently it's not working. But my point is to watch Cuba and see what happens, because if these protests are just the beginning of the end of the Cuban government, or the end of communism in Cuba, that would be an opposite example. It would be an example that we conservatives could cite, and I guess I should put in my full disclosure, I'm a conservative. Always keep that in mind when you evaluate whatever I say. But if the Cuban government falls, or is forced to change radically to become much freer, that becomes an argument for we conservatives to cite, to say, actually, the sanctions do work. Sanctions do work. It's only a matter of how long it takes to work. We don't know how long it would take the sanctions to have an effect in Iran. But what I hope, what we all should hope, but our friends on the left, as you will see, fervently do not hope, if what we, the rest of us, hope will happen in Cuba actually happens, then that becomes a very strong argument that the same thing will happen in Iran, and it becomes a strong argument to deep six this JCPOA, the so-called nuke deal that our friends, well, this administration, the presidential administration, is trying to revive. It becomes a strong argument against that, and it becomes a strong argument for the Trump policy. So I just want to get that out of the way, get that point across. And now what I want to do is I want to quote a little bit from some tweets, 3 tweets. Actually, it'll be a total of 2, but first 3, just give you the text above these videos, and I'm going to show you 3 videos of these demonstrations in case you haven't seen them, because maybe you're watching the mainstream media for your news and they are maybe not showing what's going on, or maybe they are mischaracterizing what's going on, as the New York Times did, and just calling these economic demonstrations. It's not. They are demonstrations against communism and socialism, and for freedom, libertad. You will hear that word so often. It's libertad means liberty. It means freedom. It doesn't mean better food prices. It means freedom. So first, let me just give you this headline. This is where I'm getting these little videos from. Mass protests erupt in Cuba against commie dictatorship. Quote, "We want freedom," unquote. Quote, "Our children are dying of hunger," unquote. And then the entire article is just this sentence, or the reporter just has one sentence: "Something big is happening in Cuba." And now we go right to these tweet. So here's the first one from Alexander Kraus. Never seen images from Havana. Thousands are mobilizing across Cuba demanding the end of the communist dictatorship while screaming, quote, "We are not afraid. We are not afraid," unquote. Here is the video. Second video from the post-millennial. More incredible footage coming out of Cuba. Protesters chanting in front of Communist Party headquarters, chanting, quote, "Cuba isn't yours," unquote. Here is the video. That was video number 2. Video number 3 from Giancarlo Sopo. This gives me chills. Thousands of Cubans are marching on Havana's Malecón or Malazón. Forgive my terrible Spanish, and I don't know what a Malecón or Malazón is. But whatever it is, they're chanting, quote, "Libertad," unquote. Again, that means freedom. This comes as the island's communist ruler just went on national television and issued a, quote, "combat order," unquote, according to reports. And here is that video.
Le están dando.
Ay, le dieron a uno, le dieron a uno.
Le dieron a policía.
Oh, mira, mira, se formó. Con un palo, mira este. Mira. Cállate, no grites.
Ay, Dios. Ay, eso no me gusta, Dios mío. Pero y esto es buena, la primera que pasa. Ay, chica.
Ay, porque tú no ves noticias. Ay, se lo van a comer.
No,
ay,
no
el policía.
Comer, la policía es que se
al
van a
policía es que se
Mira,
van a
mira,
comer.
Ya el policía.
Those were the videos I wanted to show you of what happened in Cuba on Sunday. Now I just want to give you some comments from some government officials, from representatives and senators. Start here with Kevin McCarthy. After decades of suffering through a communist dictatorship, the Cuban people deserve liberty. I am proud to stand in solidarity with the people of Cuba who are calling out for freedom. Ted Cruz. The communist Cuban regime will be consigned to the dustbin of history. It has brutalized and denied freedom to generations of Cubans and forced my family and so many others to flee. The American people stand squarely with the men and women of Cuba and their noble fight for liberty. But not all Americans, as we'll see presently. Maria Elvira Salazar. She's less well known, so if you don't know who she is a U.S. representative from Florida. Tens of thousands of people in Cuba are protesting at this very moment. Sunday, when this was written. The regime is shutting off the internet on the island. The Castro dictatorship doesn't want the world to see what's happening. Please share and stand with these freedom fighters. Not a bad idea. We should all do that. Just as I'm sharing this with all of you. Steve Scalise, American stands with the people of Cuba as they fight for their freedom from a tyrannical government. Socialism has failed everywhere it's been tried. We can't let America become another failed socialist experiment. Will Kane. The streets of Cuba understand this is a symbol of freedom. What is that symbol of freedom when he says this? He means this, the American flag. This is very interesting to me because we have our friends on the left, some of them burning American flags here in the United States. But in oppressed lands, people who are oppressed by communism and socialism, the very ideologies that the American flag burners support, except for possibly Antifa. In fairness to them, they're just anarchists. They don't want any kind of government at all. Socialist, communism doesn't matter. But the streets of Cuba understand this is a symbol of freedom. And finally, Marco Rubio. Spontaneous street protests breaking out in several cities in Cuba right now with chants of, again, forgive my terrible Spanish, no tenemos miedo. We are not afraid. At least I got the English pronunciation pretty good, I think. We are not afraid. Frustration with the dictatorship's incompetence, greed, and repression is mounting rapidly. And I had a reason for ending with Marco Rubio because, well, here's another tweet from Marco Rubio to be followed by a video. Attention U.S. media. In Cuba, they are rising up because socialism is an always disaster. Are you going to report on this so the world can hear their voices? And here is Marco Rubio.
Since very early this morning, we've been seeing images out of Cuba, people in the street protesting, and they've been chanting, "We are not afraid." And why are they in the street? They're in the street because they seek freedom. What they seek to do basically is to live in a normal country. What they're tired of is having to be the people that can only achieve their dreams by going somewhere else. Why can Cubans achieve all kinds of things all over the world, including here in the United States, but they can't do it inside of Cuba? They're tired of living under tyranny, and they're tired of living under incompetent leaders. That's what the Cuban regime is. Because socialism and Marxism doesn't work. It's a failure. It's a failure everywhere it's been tried, and it's having a catastrophic impact on the people of Cuba. Nothing to do with the embargo, nothing to do with anything else. It has to do with the fact that these tyrants are also incompetent, and socialism, Marxism, communism, it doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere. Now, we've already had reports that the Cuban military and the police are in the street, that they're out there to hurt these people and to crack down on them. Let me tell you something, a couple things. First of all, don't do it. Do not go after your own family members, your cousins, your uncles, your aunts, the people you grew up with, your brothers, your sisters, your own blood. All these people want is to live in a normal country where their own dreams and their own hopes can become reality, where they were born, where they are from. That's what they want. And the second thing that people need to know is we're not living in the 60s and 70s anymore. Now we know everyone's first name and their last name. There will be nowhere to hide. If you're out there hurting these people and participating in this crackdown, we're going to know who you are when you try to come into the U.S. 3 years from now on vacation. We're going to know who you are when you decide Cuba's no longer for you and you try to come into the U.S. and gain, asylum here. And you're going to one day have to face justice in a free Cuba. And I hope the U.S. media and the global media are paying attention and give this coverage. Give coverage to the fact that there are people in the street in Cuba because they do not want to live under Marxism and communism and socialism anymore. They want freedom. They want freedom, political freedom, but they want economic freedom. They want the ability to live their lives as they choose. Cover it because it's happening. Do not ignore it.
Welcome back. And now I wonder if you noticed something in common among all of these tweets I just shared with you, and of course the video by Marco Rubio. That's right. They are all Republicans. They are all Republican U.S. representatives or Republican senators, which might lead to a question. I would hope it would. This is what I mean about not all Americans standing behind these Cubans who have finally had enough. I hope they've had enough that they carry on their opposition to the government, because they can't shoot and arrest everybody. But the question to ask for today is, where are the Democrats? Where are the liberals? Where are our friends on the left? Where are they making the kind of statements that I just shared with you from Republicans, calling for freedom for the Cuban people, pledging or stating their support for the Cuban people, and most of all, recognizing that this is a call for freedom and supporting their call for freedom, not for coronavirus vaccines or cheaper prices or an end of the U.S. embargo. The Cuban government, the dictators, that was one of the reasons that they cited for the poor condition of the Cuban people. They said it was a U.S. Embargo. But take out the United States, that leaves the rest of the world. Europe has no embargo with Cuba. The problem is that Cubans have no money to buy anything, and that's why I have to say, in fairness, I'm a little puzzled where are all these cell phones coming from. But also, in fairness, I have to say that, because I always try to be fair. If I'm not, you can call me out in the comments, but I always try to be fair to our friends on the left. And in fairness, the White House, President Biden did make a statement in support of the Cuban people, and he was very specific in calling for freedom for the Cuban people. So I want to be fair about that. He did make a statement. But where is everybody else? Where is the squad? Where is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Time for another headline. America's far left silent as Cubans cry out for freedom from communist dictatorship. Top far-left figures in American politics were silent on Sunday as Cubans took to the streets, crying out for freedom from the nation's communist dictatorship. Videos, some of which I just shared with you, videos circulated on social media of Cubans marching in the streets, protesting the impoverished conditions of the island and their lack of freedom under the far-left communist regime. They did so while chanting, quote, liberty, unquote, and, quote, freedom, unquote, and here's that photo again, waving an American flag. The communist dictatorship later started cracking down on the protests, allegedly inflicting violence on the unarmed protesters and cutting off internet access. Notable far-left figures that did not weigh in on the matter by the time that I'm reporting this anyways, or the time of this news story. Maybe they have been shamed into saying something since. If they have been, I'm not aware of it. Notable far-left figures that did not weigh in on the matter included Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was described in 2016 by Tom Perez, then chairman of the Democratic Party, as the, quote, future, unquote, of the Democrat Party. Sanders has repeatedly praised murderous communist dictators and regimes, including Cuba and the Soviet Union, where he went for his honeymoon. One final point I would just mention, which is that I showed you the photo of these Cubans marching with the American flag, and I contrasted these Cubans with our fellow Americans burning the American flag, but I'll just add a couple of more examples. There's actually 3 examples. In Iran, there was an American flag and an Israeli flag painted on the ground for Iranians to walk over. So that's not exactly protesters displaying the American flag, but they refused to walk on the flag, the American flag, or the Israeli flag for that matter. They walked around them. But and some of you older viewers, I don't remember whether there were any American flags displayed in Tiananmen Square, but I remember very well the papier-mâché Statue of Liberty that was displayed in Tiananmen Square. And there definitely were American flags in Hong Kong. Not only that, there was singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Isn't it sad that some of the greatest American patriots aren't even American, not even American, and they're not even in America? And I would just make one final point, talking about immigration. Those are the immigrants that we would want. Those are the kind of people that we want to come to this country, who come to this country because they love this country, not just for economic opportunities, but because they love our freedom. And I'll just end there for today. Thanks as always for stopping by. I really appreciate the time that you spend with me. If you could give me a thumbs up if you like this video, that would really be great. Share it with anybody you think would also like it. Got any comments? Comment section below the video, or you can put questions, suggestions for future topics. You could also subscribe. I love getting new subscribers. You could visit my other channels, my hot dog recipe channel and my original music channel. But most of all, come back and see me again. I would love to see all of you again. I look forward to seeing all of you again. And until I do see all of you again, bye.